So Heinz realized that the 12-tone tuning seemed to be based off of the major triad, which has a frequency ratio of 654 and possesses some really ideal harmonic properties. And the rest of the tuning was derived from that triad. Now he thought, well, perhaps there might be another triad that has high harmonic properties, like a high harmonic value. He found a triad of the ratio 753, which is entirely unrelated to 12 notes per octave, not really contained in the 12-note per octave tuning, but it had very high harmonic value. So he took a number of steps that I won't really get into, but you can, well, I'll sort of get into it, to derive the 13-tone Bohlen-Pierce scale. Now, it wasn't compatible with octaves. He realized at some point that he was going to have to frame this tuning in a 12th instead of an octave, so an octave and a fifth. In other words, a 3-to-1 frequency ratio, which I've been calling the tritive. That's what he decided would be the frame, and kind of would have to be the frame with the logic that he started just led to that. Miraculously, 6 years later, another microwave engineer named John Pierce invented the same tuning. Microwave engineers of all things. Now, it doesn't surprise me that they're engineers. There are all kinds of examples of engineers that came up with musical instruments, and so for engineers to come up with musical tuning doesn't seem that far off. But for them to both be microwave engineers was a coincidence. And in fact, Heinz Bohlen was a fan of John Pierce because John Pierce was already a famous microwave engineer because he invented the idea of communication satellites. Or did Arthur C. Clarke do that? So John Pierce came up with it in a different mathematical way, though. They derived the tuning in a different way. John Pierce, I believe, was looking at equal tempered tunings and then found that this was one of the best equal tempered tunings, and in fact, like I said, more harmonically, mathematically harmonically pure than the 12-tone tuning. Heinz Bohlen is German, but at some point he moved and was living in the San Francisco area, as well as John Pierce. They were both living in San Francisco for some amount of time, and they never met. And it's even more sad since Heinz Bohlen was a fan of John Pierce, and he would have liked to meet him for a couple different reasons. John Pierce may have had some issue with Heinz Bohlen, I'm not sure. I mean, obviously, if you invent something that's really amazing and then you find out, oh, someone already did it 6 years earlier, and they were also the same occupation you were, you might kind of have a bone to pick, or kind of, wish that wouldn't have happened. John Pierce actually kept referring to the Bohlen-Pierce scale as the Pierce scale, so Heinz Bohlen kind of felt sad, like John Pierce had something against him, and they never met. So the father of computer music, Max Matthews, is actually tied into this because he did a lot of research with John Pierce, and he is located in the San Francisco area. He works at Stanford University, and I've met Max Matthews many times, and he's awesome. And also my main professor at Berklee, Dr. Boulanger, is very good friends with Max Matthews. They've toured the world playing Bohlen-Pierce scale music on Max Matthews' radio baton, which is an instrument about this size that works in 3 dimensions with these 2 batons. So anyway, they've extensively played Bohlen-Pierce scale music and worked with John Pierce and this and that, and somehow Heinz Bohlen's always left out of this, of everything. So it was my goal at some point a few years ago to get them together and meet each other. So I was going to go out to Stanford and get Max Matthews, John Pierce, and Heinz Bohlen together. Dr. Boulanger is in Boston. Dr. Boulanger informed me that at that point John Pierce had Alzheimer's and was in the hospital and absolutely couldn't meet anybody. And although I understand that situation, is horrible for his family and that he might be confused and not remember what's going on or whatever, But I begged and pleaded. I said, you know, for the sake of Heinz Bohlen, who is going to be alive for some time, and is going to have to live with the sadness of knowing he never got to meet someone he's a fan of, the co-inventor of the tuning, that they share both names, you know, I couldn't imagine it would be too upsetting for John Pierce to just meet someone new, even if he might forget. But anyway, it didn't happen. It was very sad. But I've continued to keep in touch with Heinz Bohlen, and whenever I have any kind of new update or new music, I email him. He's back in Germany now. Very nice guy. We got together for sushi once when I was in San Francisco, and we hardly even talked about the tuning. You know what we talked about? Chaos theory. He has a big interest in chaos theory. Kind of funny, huh? Oh, yeah, it brings a tear to my eye to even think about that story. And they even kind of looked alike. They had that microwave engineer look, I guess. So that initial triad that he came up with, you can see here, was 1 to 1 was the bass note, 5 to 3, 7 to 3. So it's a 7-5-3 relationship. Doesn't sound like a major triad, but it's very harmonic. Might not even really sound that harmonic, since our ears are all trained for a different tuning. Even something that's completely, absolutely in tune might sound out of tune until we're used to it. In the same sense, if you hear a perfect third or a perfect sixth, it sounds a little out of tune even though it's more in tune, because we're used to the slightly out of tune thirds and sixths of 12-tone tuning. So at any rate, he had these 3 notes, and then the next step, that's what he called phase 1. I'm going to show you this again. Take a look at where it says 1. So there's a 1 to 1 ratio, 7, 3, 5, 3, and then at the top there's 3 to 1. That's just the trittative above that. So he took that same chord and put the 3 to 1 frequency ratio as the top note and played the same chord. So in other words, just kind of transpose it up. And that added 2 more notes to the scale. So now he had then this actually created a 3rd triad, which he then put the bass note back at the bottom note, and then that added these 2 notes. So that at least made a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 note scale. And he compared all the ratios between each of these notes and noticed that they were either like a half step or a whole step, which, you know, not literally meaning in relation to the 12-tone tuning, but kind of like a half step and whole step. So then he proceeded to just fill in the gaps the same way that the 12-tone tuning was derived. So these would be considered like the diatonic notes. Now you can see, I'll just show this again so you can see